Snow White, and you're watching Marilyn Monday.
In January 1954, Marilyn married Joe DiMaggio at San Francisco City Hall. We made reservations up in Monterey, California for our wedding night, but that was just to throw off the press. But we weren't going to Monterey. We were going to Palm Springs. We actually drove straight down toward Los Angeles. A few people know that halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles is a little tiny place called Paso, Robles. It's in San Luis Obispo County. And guess what? That's where I went to school. I don't mean Marilyn Monroe, I mean me, Marilyn Monday. I actually graduated from Paso Robles High School. But guess what? That's where Marilyn and Joe stopped on their wedding night in 1954. It was quite a big day. I was very surprised I hadn't heard of it before, but then it dawned on me that my dad told me a story about it way back when I was a little girl, and I didn't believe him. I guess time exposes all truth, doesn't it? I had to call him and apologize. Well, anyway, here's what happened. In Marilyn's Footsteps by Michelle Morgan. You might have heard about this place and not even known it. She called it the Hot Springs Hotel. It says here, on the night of their wedding, Marilyn and Joe DiMaggio dined here at the Hot Springs Hotel. Marilyn, wearing a headscarf and dark glasses, reportedly dined on steak, as both she and her new husband sat in a secluded corner of the restaurant. It says it was on 13th and Spring Streets in Paso Robles, California. It also says, destroyed by fire in the 1960s. But that's just not true. And so I went inside the Paso Robles Inn. I went right up to the front desk and I said, do you know that Marilyn and Joe ate here on their wedding night? And they said, no. And I said, was there a fire here since 1954? And they opened this big book of Paso Robles Inn knowledge, and they said there were two fires. One was in 1940, and here was the other one. So ever since the fire, it's been called the Paso Robles Inn. That means in 1954, what's standing today is what was standing then, and the steakhouse has never been touched. So I was able to go there and have steak dinner and know that she had been there too. And you know what? I can't believe I never knew that. I lived there my whole life. I even ate there on my prom night. So it says they dined in a corner. I asked if they moved the booths around ever, and they said no. Once they put them in, they just kind of left it there.
Take me in your arms and never let me go.
Do you know, after riding in a car from San Francisco all the way to Paso Robles, you're going to have to use the restroom. The restaurant doesn't have its own restroom, and neither does the cafe. But there is a restroom upstairs in the lobby. So I wonder if she went up those very same stairs and across those very same bathroom tiles. You never know. It hasn't been changed since before then. It's a historic building.
Whisper to me softly while the moon is low. Hold me close and tell me what I want to know. Say it to me gently, let the sweet talk flow. Come a little closer.
So did they stay the night at the Paso Robles Inn that night? No, they did not. They continued to drive down the street to the nicest at the time motel in the whole city, and they got a room at the Clifton Motel.
Make love to me.
The Clifton Motel actually makes the book too. There's no address listed, but the Clifton Motel is right on the edge of Spring Street and Niblick, the Niblick Bridge. It's right on the corner. And if you keep going past Spring Street, past the Niblick Bridge, you get right on the 101 South and headed back toward Honeymoon Town. On 14 January 1954, Marilyn and Joe DiMaggio stayed in room 15 at the Clifton Motel on what was to be their first night together as man and wife. The motel, which was located about 200 miles from San Francisco, was owned by a man called Ernest Sharp. When the famous couple checked in, Mr. Sharp failed to recognize them. It wasn't until days later, after seeing a photograph of Marilyn and Joe, that he realized who the famous occupants had been. To commemorate the event, Mr. Sharp placed a plaque outside the room that read, "Joe and Marilyn slept here." Now, this is not quite true, I know this book was published a long time ago, but this is the story that my dad told me when I was a little girl. So Mr. Sharp knew exactly who they were when they checked in, because they made him promise that there was a television in the room and they didn't have one. So he had to go get one and make sure they had a television in their room so that they could watch the press and see if there was any publicity about their wedding, and they wanted to see all of it. When they checked out, they said, "Don't tell anyone we were here. Please don't even look." And so he didn't watch them leave. He didn't watch them drive away. But as soon as they were gone, do you know what he did? And this is the story he told my father. Mr. Sharp went straight back into their room. I'm sorry, this is very bizarre, but it's a thing that he did because boys will be boys. He went straight back into their room. He didn't know who used it last, but he knew it had been used, and he took the toilet seat off of the toilet. He put it in a shadow box, and he kept it in the lobby of the Clifton Motel until it closed and became apartment buildings later. And my dad saw the toilet seat, and that man said Marilyn Monroe sat on this toilet seat when she was here. And my dad wasn't sure if he believed him, but he told me the story because he knew I was a Marilyn fan, and my dad's a big Marilyn fan. But he wasn't sure if it was true. Turns out it was. Mr. Sharp also kept everything that was in the trash, which included one of Marilyn Monroe's silk stockings, and it had a hole in it. He ended up donating it to Ripley's Believe It or Not. I'm willing to bet that there were 2 stockings, and that since one ripped, she threw them both away, and he kept the one that was not ripped. That's what I'm willing to think. He probably still has that toilet seat too. In the book, it doesn't say that the building is no longer there or that it's been demolished or anything, but that was the popular belief until recently when I went there myself. The Clifton Motel has been converted into apartment buildings. The Clifton Motel was built in a square shape with a pool in the middle, and the lobby was right in the front by the street. The rooms started at the lobby and went around clockwise, starting from 1, and they're still numbered that way today. And I asked if any of the apartments have been converted into 2 apartments or 1 apartment, if they knocked any walls down, and they said no, nothing like that. They just redid most of the kitchens. And I found what used to be room 15. There's a door from room 15 that goes straight into the pool on the inside so that nobody on the outside can see you come and go from the pool. If they had stayed more than 1 night, I think that door would have been put to great use, but they only stayed the 1 night. On the other side, there's another door, and that's where you park your car and then walk in. So I went to that door, and you know I had to knock.
Once I had a secret love.
Well, the man inside, he knew everything about Marilyn staying there. He said he wasn't sure this whole time if it was his apartment or not, but he sure hoped it was. And he had pictures of Marilyn all over his whole place. So I got to go inside, and we took some pictures, and Mike gave me permission to share his photo in this video. It was all so exciting, I couldn't believe it. I actually got to go inside the room where Marilyn and Joe spent their wedding night. I felt so fortunate. He also had a pamphlet of Xeroxed pages all about the wedding night and Marilyn having slept there.
Within the heart of me.
A friend of mine said that her dad, he remodeled most of the apartments, but he said the kitchens were pretty much still the same as they used to be. And that same kitchen was there. You know what Mike said to me? He said, "You're the first person who has ever come to see this room." And he said he had lived there for 15 years. Can you believe that? It's been sitting right there this whole time, and nobody knows. Well, I kind of gave his address here, but please no doxing or anything. Don't go find him and pound on his door or anything. He's a very nice person, but I don't want to push his kindness. So where did they go from there? Now this part is not in Marilyn's footsteps because nobody really knew about it except for the local town where it happened. So from the Clifton Motel, they started to drive the 101 south to their honeymoon destination. Oh gosh, we've been driving since San Francisco. We slept here. I haven't eaten since our steak dinner at the Paso Robles Inn Steakhouse. Joe, I'm famished. Can't we stop for breakfast or brunch or something? Well, guess what? When you're driving along the 101 South, and then you see this big adobe tower with a big mission bell on it. It's still there today, and it was there then. It's called the Motel Inn, and it's the world's first motel ever. Is where Joe and Marilyn stopped for lunch after they left the Clifton Motel. It had a famous restaurant with home cooking, and it was a family-owned little motel. The old sign is still there. Nobody knew where we were as far as the press was concerned. But then there was a man from the Telegram Tribune who spotted us while we were having lunch. He said, "Aren't you a little lost? Everybody's wondering where you are." And Joe said, "I'm sure they'll know soon enough." And he was right. So he went and used the payphone and called the local paper, the Telegram Tribune in Paso Robles, and he said, "Who can you send to take a picture?" The day after our wedding. Very exclusive. So the Telegram Tribune looked around, and the only photographer available was Paul Nelson, so they sent him. And he came out looking for us. He actually went to a motel across the street before he found us here eating lunch. And though my pocket may... It was through these windows that Joe and I were clearly visible eating our lunch. And yet nobody bothered us. Well, Paul took a long time to build up his courage to ask us for a photo. Understandably so, it was a little intimidating to have a major baseball star and a big Hollywood star sitting right in front of you. And he says, "Pardon me, would it be all right if I took your picture?" And Joe looks at Marilyn and looks back at him and said, "My wife's not wearing any makeup. I'd really prefer you did not." And he said, "I can take a picture from behind so that they only see her hair and they won't see her face." And Joe said, "I'd really prefer that you didn't." And because it was such a classier time, and because Paso Robles is such a classy place, he didn't. There was no TMZ photographer jumping out of a bush or climbing under the table. He said, "All right," and he left them there to enjoy their meal. Isn't that amazing? Could have made his whole career. It was a lovely, peaceful lunch with just that 1 or 2 interruptions. It's one good story about paparazzi, amid so many really bad stories about paparazzi. Obviously, it didn't always have all these gates in front of it. It's owned by the people who own a nearby business called the Apple Farm, and they were going to rebuild it, but it turned out to really need to be demolished. They knocked down most of it, but there's one wall still standing, and it is on stilts. It's barely standing, but it's standing. So this wall is the only one left standing. That's all that's left of the hotel itself. I'll show you the other side too. My clothes may still be torn and tattered. This was our little honeymoon lunch. Isn't that nice? Isn't that so exciting? The whole lobby is still there with the bell tower and everything. Technically, our honeymoon was in Tokyo. But I mean, this was the real day after. The real thing. Right here. You know, I kind of think sometimes that this is why I was so drawn to a Spanish-style home. My happiest day was in Spanish-style buildings. Let's go take a closer look. But in my heart, I'd be a king. I think it's just amazing that these things are still there, and they are not marked in any way as a historic landmark. They're not, there's no plaque, there's no anything. So you yourself, if you want, can go to Paso Robles and eat dinner at the Paso Robles Inn Steakhouse. You can ask for Marilyn's Corner booth. Tell them Marilyn Monday sent you. I'm just kidding. They don't know who that is. I went to high school there, and my brother was a server at the Paso Robles Inn Steakhouse. But they don't know that I do this now. But I'm so happy I got to go back to my hometown for this video, and I got to go see these landmarks that I had no idea they were my stomping grounds. I stomped all over these places, and I had no idea. It's just amazing. Anyway, I'm so proud of my hometown. of Paso, Robles, California, and I hope that you will go there and walk in my footsteps where I showed you Marilyn's footsteps. And I hope that you will appreciate the magnitude of how amazing it is that they stayed there on their wedding night. That's arguably one of the most important dates in Marilyn's entire life. And you can walk in those footsteps from that day. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. And there are links in the description box if you want to leave a tip or join my Patreon. And thank you so much. I'll see you next time on Marilyn Monday. I need to find that toilet seat. Mr. Sharp, Ernest Sharp, are you out there? Can you call me? I just want to see it. I just want to see it. Nothing's gonna happen. I don't need to touch it. I just want to see it. And then, what's that behind you? I'm just kidding.